have your attention, please, for a moment? Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to see so many of you here, both in the Aula Magna of University of Latvia, and also to the people watching us via live stream on Delphi LV. The reason we have gathered here today is because we have gathered here for a conversation on the motion, Has Science Buried God?, where we will explore relationship between religion, theology, science, and philosophy of science. And to do that, we have invited two very distinguished, excellent speakers that I'd love to introduce to you now. On your left, you have Marta Salziņš, who is a physicist, the former rector of University of Latvia with an interest in quantum mechanics. And he has also done a stint at UC Berkeley as the visiting Miller professor. On your right, you have John Lennox, who's a mathematician and philosopher of science. He takes part in many debates on motions like these. And he's currently professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford and also a fellow at Green Templeton College, Oxford. The way we will proceed is that we will start with a 10-minute opening statement for each of these people. Afterwards, we will proceed with me asking a few questions and both of these gentlemen engaging in a conversation on all of these questions. In the very end, we will have an opportunity for questions from the audience that both of them will respond to. One thing you can do, though, even though you'll have an opportunity to ask live questions, is that you can use the Twitter hashtag that you can see up there, called Lennox and Salziņš, and you can send your responses, your comments, your thoughts, your questions all throughout this discussion. And some of the most interesting questions I'll also try to take a look at and also try to ask during the conversation. But now, before we proceed with the opening statements, it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to the Dean of the Faculty of Theology, who has also helped organizing this exciting event.
Latvijas Universitātes teoloģijas fakultātes vārdā es jūs sirsnīgi sveicu šajā vakarā, šajā debašu vakarā. Un cilvēki vienmēr ir visvairāk un šeit mācījušies dialogā viens ar otru. Un tāpēc tas ir ārkārtīgi liels pagodinājums un prieks būt klāt šo divu izcilo zinātnieku savstarpējās debatēs un arī debatēt ar viņiem. Tāpēc es mums visiem novēlu no sirds jauku un bagātu vakaru. Un mēs jau visi esam pieraduši, ka teologi runā par Dievu, un dažiem tas jau ir pat garlaicīgi. Tāpēc īpaši interesanti ir tas, ka dabas zinātnieki šovakar runā par Dievu. Paldies!
So, as was introduced, we will now proceed with a 10-minute opening statement by Marta Salziņš. Marta, the floor is yours.
Dear Professor Lennox, I'm so happy to welcome you to the University of Latvia and to Aula Magna of our university. Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear guests, actually I am so impressed to see so many of you at our Aula, because when I am trying to remember, and as the rector or former rector of university, I have been in this hall so many times. I'm trying to remember when I saw such crowded audience in a large Aula. I can remember only once. For Latvians, probably it will be understandable. There was a concert, birthday concert for Raimonds Pauls, one of very famous composer in Latvia. And only at that time I saw something similar like this discussion. And probably I think it gives a very clear sign how important this discussion is for society in Latvia. My feeling is that usually we are thinking that to discuss God, to discuss religion, it's something very personal which shouldn't be done in open. Maybe it's even intimate for any person. Now I see that actually I was wrong, and many people are willing to discuss these things. For many people these things are very important, and I am very pleased to see that, and I am very happy that this discussion will be happening this evening. But now probably I should come to the subject of today's discussion. Has science buried God? Actually, if I am speaking honestly, my first impression when I was reading this title was that it's a little bit artificial. This is not the way, it's not the terms in which I am used to think when I'm thinking about religion. When I'm trying to understand from where this type of questions are coming, probably, it's my guess, that it's coming from kind of, and it will be strange to hear it from scientists, from kind of overestimated power of science. Everybody of us, we are using mobile phones, computers, driving very sophisticated cars, and of course this would be impossible without very advanced science. And then it comes to the point that everything to be true must be proved by science, whatever it means. Is it really so? I am not sure that it's really so, because if I'm thinking of some aspects of my life, for example, one of the composers and one of the pieces which I really love and enjoy is Bach's Passion for John. Should it be proved by science that it's a good piece of music? I'm not sure. We think that everybody should live a moral life. Should it be proved by science that we should live moral life, or it's something different? I think that it's something different, and this means that not everything should be proved by science. And this is why I'm a little bit strange feeling that we will be discussing kind of very straight question: does science bury God? But of course, I wouldn't like to shy away from discussion of this question, and if I'm trying to think when in my field it can arise. I'm coming from physics, and of course we all know that sometimes physicists are asking the most fundamental questions which science is asking in general. For example, how universe started, why laws of physics are as they are, why the values of fundamental constants as they are. And this is clearly science, and probably in some sense it overlaps in fundamental questions which religion is addressing as well. And then my feeling and my attitude is probably the following. I'm doing quantum mechanics. If I'm going to lab or doing some calculations, and suddenly my experiments are coming out in strange way, usually I will not be thinking that there's some divine intervention and that God is responsible why I got strange results. I can have only two kind of feelings. Maybe I'm doing the wrong kind of experiment, I'm doing some mistakes in my experiment, or my theories are not right and I should improve my theories. But as I said, there's these fundamental questions: why world is as it is, how it originates, why fundamental constants are as they are, and if you are listening to this question, why fundamental constants are as they are, why laws of physics are as they are. This is actually not a question for science. Science would ask how world operates, how we can describe world, not why. And this is kind of question which is actually a fundamental question, and you can address it in philosophical way, you can address, if you like, in a religious way, and actually it's a very important question, and it would be too easy to play it down and say, like sometimes people in quantum mechanics saying, in quantum mechanics we have some very difficult questions with interpretation as well, and then some people are saying, let's not bother about difficult questions how we should interpret quantum mechanics, it just works. We are making calculations, our devices based on these calculations are excellent, our mobile phones are improving day by day, so let's live with that and not ask questions which are not really scientific. Let's not ask philosophical questions. But of course, every person, or almost every person, is built in the way that we are willing to ask these fundamental questions. We are willing to ask these general questions. And then I think this is a point when science and religion in some sense overlap. And I believe this will be the point in which maybe not always we will be agreeing with our guest professor Lennox. And maybe two final kind of, not exactly statements, but two final ideas which I would like to stress. When we are reading scripture, when we are reading Bible, I think that very often when we are coming to discussion is a contradiction in text in Bible and science, we are trying to interpret Bible as a science book. For me, definitely Bible is not science book. And if in Bible I'm reading something which is in kind of contradiction with my everyday experience, for example, Jesus might multiplied bread or turned water into the wine, I'm not analyzing in terms, look, it's impossible because there's conservation laws, these laws or that law of conservation. Usually I am inclined to, in this case, to interpret it as a story, as a parable. When Bible is telling me that people are in need, you should do something about that. And there was Jesus Christ who solved this problem, let's say, and feeded all the people, but not necessarily literally turned one piece of bread multiplied into 100 pieces of bread or 1,000 pieces of bread. This is my way how I would like to interpret this type of kind of formal contradiction if we are reading Bible and trying to understand how we're living in this world. But final my statement, when I'm thinking in general about religion, why it's important to discuss it, as I said, for me it's not important, it's not most important point to discuss it in the relation with science. As I said, for me still it seems a little bit artificial. I think that for me it's much more important when I'm thinking how I feel in this world. What's my purpose to be in this world? Why I should behave in moral way in this world? And if I'm discussing this type of questions, and in some sense also my personal relation to world, if you would like to say to God as well, it's a legitimate question to discuss, sometimes to discuss my experiences when I'm turning to be in woods or to be in church and listening Bach music. I have some very special feelings, and maybe this is a point when I am mostly thinking, is there something in religion? Maybe we should be more carefully thinking about my personal relations to the religion, because from the very beginning probably I should be starting from the statement that I don't belong to any church. I'm not formally religious. But also definitely I'm not a kind of warrior atheist who is saying that no, God is bad and you shouldn't fool yourself with this kind of stories which definitely are not true. It's definitely not my position. But I think that in these moments when we are thinking our place in the world, our attitude to the world, how we experience the world, then is the moment when, for me personally, questions about religion are most important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mats, for the opening thoughts. And now I'd love to give the floor to John Lennox.
Professor Ausins, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the warmth of your welcome to the University of Latvia. I'm greatly honoured to be invited here, but doubly honoured to have the opportunity to talk with a very distinguished professor of physics. So thank you so much for that. Indeed, listening to Professor Ausins, I think he might be surprised by how much we agree, but we're going to discuss that in a moment. Our title as Science Buried God is a very real issue in most of the countries I visit, principally because there are many very famous scientists who feel that science has put an end to the reasonableness of faith in God. The idea is very widespread in many countries in the West that science and belief in God are mutually exclusive. Now, of course, by God, we must understand, from my perspective, that I'm speaking about not some vague Greek God, but the God of the Bible, that is the supernatural, eternal creator and upholder of the universe. And science is a set of intellectual disciplines to study the creation. Now, it's quite obvious when we think about it that it cannot be that there's a simple conflict between science and faith in God. Take the Nobel Prize for Physics. It was won by Steven Weinberg, and he thinks that the main job of science today is to get rid of religion. But there was also a Nobel Prize winner for physics called Bill Phillips. He is a Christian. Now, it's obvious that what divides them is not their physics. They're both brilliant. What divides them is their worldview. So to say that it is impossible to believe in God as a leading scientist is just not true. It isn't true historically either, because there is a correlation between the rise of modern science and faith in God. Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and so on, Clerk Maxwell, were all believers in God. And historians of science have commented on it, and they've pointed out that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believe in a lawgiver, as C.S. Lewis summarized it. So there's a historical precedent, and therefore I'm not ashamed to be both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably it was Christianity that gave me my subject. But that brings us to the question, why is it that people like Steven Weinberg and Stephen Hawking think that we've got to choose between God and science and you cannot have both? And I want to suggest that there are several reasons. The first is a false concept of God. They believe that people invented gods when they couldn't understand how things like lightning worked. But now that we have an explanation in terms of atmospheric physics of lightning, we don't need the God explanation. Their view is that God is a kind of gap filler. I can't explain it, therefore God did it. Now, of course, if you believe in a God like that, you have to choose between God and science, because that is the way you define God. But I don't know any sensible theist who believes in a God like that. The book of Genesis does not start with the words, "In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't understand." It starts with, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That is the whole universe. God is the creator of everything, the bits we understand and the bits we don't. The point I'm making now leads to this. God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. Why is the water boiling? Well, because heat energy is coming from the flame of the Bunsen burner through the base of the kettle, and it's agitating the molecules of water. No, it's not. The kettle's boiling because I want a cup of tea. Now, you laugh because that's a foolish opposition. There are two kinds of explanation at stake here. One's a scientific one, and the other is in terms of personal volition and agency. I want a cup of tea. And you would never dream of placing those explanations in conflict. What is more, which is the more important of the two explanations? Well, clearly the personal one. People have been making tea for thousands of years without understanding the physics behind it. You see, we need the two explanations. God does not compete with science as an explanation any more than Henry Ford competes with the law of internal combustion as an explanation for the motor car. The next reason for the confusion is this, and I was delighted to hear Professor Eisen state his case clearly. is the idea that's very widespread that he does not share, which is that science is the only way to truth. We call that scientism. But we need to realize that that is hubris. There are obvious limits to science. The law of gravity I was taught at school, and I love it because of the wonderful descriptions of the planetary motion you can derive from it. But I thought at school that the law of gravity told me what gravity was. I discovered from people like Richard Feynman, who won the Nobel Prize, that it does no such thing. Nobody really knows what gravity is. The law of gravity is even limited within science in terms of explanatory power. It gives us a certain level of understanding and enables us to make brilliant calculations. The brilliant physicist Arthur Eddington made the point once that science is successful because it asks a limited set of questions. It's like a net. And if you have a net with a mesh that's 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters, it won't catch fish that are 10 centimeters long. It doesn't catch everything. And to claim on the basis of that net that all fish are more than 20 centimeters long would be absurd. Now, Peter Medawar, who won another Nobel Prize, says it's so easy to see that science cannot answer all questions. It cannot even answer the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going to? What is the meaning of my life? And part of the generator, I think, of the contemporary confusion is that science has been brilliantly successful, and I, for one, am very grateful for it, in its spin-offs in terms of technology, that people have begun in some quarters to equate science to rationality. So if there's not a scientific explanation, that means there's no rational explanation. Science is the only way to truth. But that's obviously nonsense. You don't believe it in this university. Because if you did, you'd have to close all your literary faculties, all your history faculties, all your economic faculties, and so on, because they're not natural science. So science only goes so far. And it was Einstein who said, you can speak of the ethical foundations of science, but you cannot speak of the scientific foundations of ethics. So I just do not believe that science is in the situation to bury God. In fact, I believe actually that the denial of God is in danger of burying science, but we can talk about that a little bit later. But just as Professor Ausins has a personal dimension to his life, my evidence for God doesn't simply come from the fact that I see pointers in science, like the rational intelligibility of the universe. Because God, to me, is a person who has revealed himself in space, time, and history. It's not simply that I'm on an intellectual quest to solve within myself the question, what is ultimate reality? Because at the heart of Christianity, and I speak as a Christian, at the heart of Christianity is the claim that God has become human and has revealed himself through Jesus Christ. And so my evidences for God now grow away from the scientific to the personal, historical, and then finally to the experiential. Because being a scientist, of course, I believe that all good theories are testable. And if a theory doesn't fit the test, and therefore the final point is that Jesus Christ makes certain fundamental claims. He claims to be able to give us forgiveness and peace with God. Now, this is another big story, but the short story is that I have tested those claims and found them to be true, not only for myself, but I've seen the power of God work in so many other people. So science on one side, history on the other, and also my personal experience. So I submit to you, science has not buried God.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much both for the opening statements. So we will now proceed with me asking a few questions to both the gentlemen in the panel and then both discussing them. So the first question that we probably have to deal with, if we're talking about has science buried God, we have to be clear on the terms that we are using in this conversation. So when we speak of a God, we can speak of many things. We can speak of one God, several. We can speak of a God who has unlimited powers, who has limited powers. We can speak of a God who's trying to do good things, or maybe he's not trying to do good things. So question to John, what would be your personal definition of God, and why do you choose this definition over other definitions?
Well, my personal definition is the one I've given, in the sense that I believe that God is, as traditionally understood, certainly in the three great monotheistic religions, is the creator and sustainer of the universe. He is a rational spirit that is not simply a force, but has personality. Now, of course, within Christianity, God is revealed as very complex, and that corresponds with my experience of reality. Simple things, reality tends to be very complex, and so God reveals himself to us as a fellowship of three persons. Now, obviously, we can't spend the evening talking about that. That's why I mentioned at the end that there is another process that has happened, that I believe in the reality of revelation, because I don't think this universe is a closed system of cause and effect, but God has created it and he has spoken into it and actually intervened in his history, a question that Professor Ausins raised and I think would be good to talk about. So if you ask me where my concept of God comes from, it actually mainly comes from the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I believe certain things about him, and I believe them on the basis of evidence, not blind faith of any kind. So that is my position.
Let's not clap after each statement.
When I'm listening to Professor Lennox, it's always coming, or discussing similar themes, it's always coming to my mind. Now we are discussing concept of God like philosophical concept. I believe that many people who are going to the church every day, they don't have this kind of philosophical, rational, in some sense, scientific, not in sense of natural sciences, discussion what does it mean to have concept of God. And if I am thinking in these rational terms, I know that sometimes we can distinguish two ways how you are thinking about God, at least for me personally. One is kind of a rational way. This is a question why laws of the nature are as they are. And then we can philosophically discuss that maybe there's theory of multiverses, maybe there's many universes with different set of laws and we are just happening to live in one of them, which is suitable for us and all the rest are not suitable for human beings to be evolved. But maybe there's some different reasons and maybe is God behind that. Another way, as I said, when I'm going to woods, going to church, listening music, there's some feeling that there is something more than just rational things around us. And sometimes then we are speaking about kind of mystical experience, and in this part of the world, mystic sometimes seems like a bad word, and it's something which normal people or rational people shouldn't be using. For me, it's kind of actually a very positive experience, which I personally enjoy if suddenly I have this feeling. But then is the third aspect. For me, like somebody who is regularly not going to church, which is most difficult. And this is this personal God. And then as a person who is coming from a rational world, always is coming for me the question. There's Buddha, there's Muhammad, there's Jesus. And for different group of people, each of them can be very personal. And I understood that probably it's coming from kind of problems which I have and many people have in this part of the world. Because to have this personal God, you should probably be going to church from very early ages, from childhood, which for many people in former Soviet Union simply didn't happen. And then when you are coming, not for everybody, but for many, And then you are coming to a certain age and you are going to church and suddenly you should prove yourself that this personal God, Jesus, is the right God, and the rest of the ways to think about God, it's not the right one. And this actually, for me personally, when I'm thinking about religion, is most difficult point. This first rational and mystical experience, it's very easy for me to make part of my feeling about the world.
Well, let's think about that. I immediately think about my wife, you see, because she's not just to be scientifically studied. In other words, she's a real person with physics and chemistry. And I could study her scientifically. I could investigate her with an electron tunneling microscope. But she's also a person. And I relate to her as a person, but not irrationally. There's emotion, but the emotions and that relationship that you talk about, they're not necessarily irrational, even when it comes to music. I'm a bit wary of using the word irrational, but I agree with you that, of course, the scientific side, when it comes to big questions, is the least important side. But it's a basis. Then comes the question of relationship, and you say the mystical experience, but then you come to your difficulty. Now, I understand your difficulty. I come from Northern Ireland, where many people have been completely turned off Christianity because they've seen it leading to terrorism and all this kind of thing. At least that's what it appears to be. And therefore, it's very important to ask ourselves the question, how do we deal with all these competing claims? Now, you're absolutely right. My faith in Christ is a personal faith, but it's also public. Because if I cannot defend it, if there's no rational basis for it, I'm in trouble. And I only know one way of dealing with any question, and that is to say, what is the evidence? Now, probably this is too early in the discussion to go into that evidence, but it is the fact that many people are put off by formal religion. Many people are put off by formal religion. And therefore, that's why it has been important for me in life to go back to the original biblical documents. And I discovered that Christ was very critical of religion that's gone bad and putting people off. And Christopher Hitchens is one of whose book is sitting right here, is one of the people that pointed this out. And I had a lot of sympathy for him. I think there's a way through that one, but we can discuss it a little later.
Maybe speaking about this particular point, so you said that you have looked at your own personal experiences, but also you have read the Revelation, and it's part of the reason why you believe in Christianity. I just wanted to share a brief quote from Carl Sagan, a famous astrophysicist and also popularizer of science. Suppose a new prophet arises who claims a revelation of God, and that revelation contravenes the revelations of all previous religions. How is the average person, someone not so fortunate as to have received this revelation personally, to decide whether this new revelation is valid or not? You have to ask, what is the evidence? And it's insufficient to say, well, there's only this extremely charismatic person who said that he had a conversion experience. How would you personally respond to this kind of claim? Why do you think that looking at Revelation and some personal experiences is better in Christianity case?
Well, what Sagan says has happened before, of course. Jesus Christ was precisely such a figure who appeared on the world stage and contradicted a lot of what had been taught before him. It's not enough, I agree with Sagan, to see him as a charismatic figure. He made certain claims, but they were huge claims which he validated. Now, if we analyze those claims in history that, for instance, Jesus Christ claimed that he would die and rise again, it's very difficult to fulfill that if there's no truth behind it. And part of the evidence for the truth of Christianity is not revelation. We need to come to that in a minute. Revelation is where God reveals something to us. But history itself, I believe, provides us with an enormous amount of evidence that Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead. And that's one of my starting points. Because if that happened, then I'm going to take him very seriously. And that distinguishes him from every other religious leader that's ever lived immediately. They haven't risen from the dead. And then the second point is, just finally, that if he claims to be able to do things because he's risen in my life today, and I test it and I find it's true, then I'm inclined to believe that what is claimed as revelation is perfectly rational because it fits into my experience. I do not believe, you see, that revelation contradicts reason. If you want to get to know me, I'll have to reveal myself to you through talking. If I talk, you use your reason on my talking, but your reason will not be able to get to know me without me revealing myself. At the higher level, that is what I believe revelation is.
Let's not do that, please.
Okay, but I still have this feeling that to be in your position, initially you should be believing in Jesus Christ, and only then start to analyze why I believe in Jesus Christ. For many people of my generation, and I clearly understand that it's a problem of my generation, let's say, and people who are living in this part of the world and was born in this part of the world, that we don't have this experience from the very beginning, from early childhood. And then at some point, we're starting to think about these very fundamental questions, why we are in this world, what's the purpose being in this world, how we should behave in this world. And in some sense, as for me coming from science, and I will especially oversimplify that, then I have a set of possibilities. I don't know, Buddhism, Christianity, to be Muslim, and I should choose which one. Of course, it's not so simple, because if I'm trying to think about myself and trying to somehow project me to the past, at least theoretically I can imagine that my predecessors many generations ago somehow went to Holy Land with crusades, whatever, try to be in the holy city, and it's very hard for me to imagine that they were sitting in some Buddhist temple somewhere in India, because I'm from this part of the world.
Yes.
I know that many people will not agree with me, because some of my colleagues who are Buddhists here in the audience probably will argue with me that it's, again, they have different experience, different way to religion. And still I am struggling with that I'm coming not from the, not in the position that initially was my belief in God, and only then I started to question why it's in this way or one way or another way. If I would be coming in this way, probably it would be much more simpler for me.
This question has played a fundamental role in my entire life. I sympathize with it deeper than you might imagine. I did grow up in a Christian family, my parents and my grandparents. So I first heard about Christianity and responded as a child. At Cambridge, I was challenged. And they said, of course you're a Christian, your parents were, your grandparents were. It's just Irish genetics. And that's all. So what I did was this. I wanted to know whether it was true and whether people were fixed in their worldview from the beginning. So on that day, when I was 18 years old at Cambridge, I started a lifelong befriending people who did not share my worldview. That led to my learning both German and Russian. And I spent a lot of time during the Cold War, particularly in East Germany and Poland and Hungary, and then after the wall fell, in the academies of science in the former Soviet Union, talking to people, because one of the most significant things for me in life, because I come from a Christian background, is to have seen many people as adults not sharing my background, but becoming Christians on the basis of the evidence. So if there was a motivating factor in my life, you've hit on actually one of the major ones, because I do not want to be fooled. For me, the big question is not, is Christianity helpful because I was brought up in it as a child, but is it true? And one of the evidences is people can change their worldviews, even as adults, and I've seen it happen. So I do sympathize with this very much.
No.
Okay, one of the questions people talk about a lot is the reason why the laws of physics are the way they are, and also different theories of the creation of the universe. So the question for Marta, do you think we will ever be in a position where we can understand why the universe was created and how it was created, why the laws of physics are the way they are, and do you think God can be a good enough explanation for that?
Okay, let's start with the point, if I understood correctly, the question. Will we have at some point situations that we will be completely understanding the world as it is, physical world as it is? And Professor Lennox mentions Steven Weinberg, who actually claims that at some point physics will be coming to an end, that we will be a full set of the physics laws and there will be nothing more to discover. I think it's my, again, absolutely personal feeling, and I wouldn't like to kind of argue with Nobel laureate, but still I have my feeling and my opinion. And my opinion is that never will be situations that we will be completely understanding the world. Maybe it's too naive comparison, but if I'm looking to ancient Greece, probably people who thought how the world is organized, that there's water, fire and something else, and this is the basic building blocks, and we will be adjusting them very little and we will be understanding the world completely. And of course, from our viewpoint, it's so naive picture of the world. I am afraid that in, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 years, people will be looking back and they will have the same feeling about science nowadays. But from the other hand, I believe that if at this particular point we don't understand something in physics, we are not immediately turning to God and saying, okay, this is what God is doing. I think that there is continuous and never-ending process. We will be understanding the world better, better and better. But then we are coming to the question, why the world is in this way? Why we have this set of physics laws? And actually, formally, it's not a question for physics, because physics is asking how this world is organized, or science in general is asking why this, how this world is organized. Why in this way? It's kind of philosophical question. And we know that in a philosophy of science there is some explanation for that. Different theories like multiverse theory, which claims that there's many parallel universes and each of them has different set of physics laws. And probably in some of them there's very strange, organized, maybe even rational beings. Like it's coming to my mind one of the stories by Stanislaw Lem, one of the Polish philosophers and writers. He said that in one of his stories he had some conscious ocean on the planet, and there was only one rational being on this planet, and it happens to be all the ocean which encompasses all the this planet. Maybe in some strange parallel universe something of this kind is happening. But again, probably scientifically we will never answer is this a correct explanation or not, because it cannot be experimentally tested and cannot be experimentally proved. And then there's one of the explanations around this line of possible arguments, that there is some supreme being who created at some point all this universe and laws of the physics. Of course, philosophically we can continue that. Is it happened only once when these laws were created, and then they were created by God in such a harmonious way that God don't need to intervene any further in the line of evolvement of physical systems, or it still can happen that God is revealing himself in some certain points. As for physicists, I don't believe that any of my physical experiments somehow will be influenced by divine intervention, that suddenly ball will not be falling vertically because God decided that this particular point it should be a different way. I don't believe in that one, but as one of the possible explanations that God was the reason why the universe was created in this way as it was created, I can accept that it's one of the ways to think about that. I'm not sure, and I'm not in the position to say that it's only one ultimate truth, and we can think only in this way about how everything came into the being, and why laws of physics are as they are, why fundamental constants are as they are. But I can accept that it's one of the ways how to think about that. But it's not a question for physics.
I agree. I agree with almost everything that was said there, because, again, the question implies that God is an alternative explanation to science. And what I've been maintaining is he's not. So that I'm not a physicist. I wish sometimes I were. I'm a bit jealous of you, sir. Because you're actually dealing with the universe in its reality. And reading as much physics as I can, it's clear to me that the questions will go on and on. But as you say, they're studying a limited thing. They're studying how it works. When you come to existence, why there is something rather than nothing, I would put it this way, you see. Science explains, but God, the existence of God, explains why science explains. That is, God is not competing. He's the last bit of physics, so to speak. But rather, my claim is that God is responsible for a universe in which science describes part of the activity. So that doesn't restrict science. It just means that we study our science, we go on and on and on, but the actual fact that we can do science and that the universe is describable in terms of rational laws is a plausibility argument, at least for me, that the universe has ultimately been caused by a rational spirit, rather than anything that's the opposite. So I'm not hindering science. God isn't an alternative explanation, and God normally doesn't intervene. I think you're quite right. It would spoil your experiments if God intervened all the time. It's interesting. The Bible claims that there is a supernatural dimension, but God's intervention is very rare in the sense of direct intervention, because if it happened all the time, the world would be chaos. So according to the New Testament, there are limited occasions, and they mainly circle around the life of Jesus Christ. You mentioned one, multiplying bread, turning water into wine, and of course the greatest one, rising from the dead. I do actually believe these are interventions. I do not believe they break the laws of nature, though. And that's a very important thing. They do not break, they do not, as David Hume claimed, violate the laws of nature. Rather, the God who did the creating is feeding by his power a new event in. The laws of nature don't prevent that happening. I mean, one easy way of explaining this, I think, is I'm staying in a hotel in Riga. I put 100 euros in a drawer tonight. I put another 100 tomorrow night. I've got 200. I wake up at the third morning and there are only 50. Now, what has been broken? The laws of arithmetic or the laws of Latvia? Well, it's obvious the laws of Latvia have been broken because the laws of arithmetic have not been broken. You see, the important thing is this. I thought that the drawer was a closed system. But actually, a thief came and put his hand in. The laws of arithmetic can't stop that happening. And I think one of the reasons that many of my scientific colleagues find it very difficult to accept even in principle miracle is that they have gone along with Christopher Hitchens and David Hume saying miracles of the type found in the New Testament violate the laws of nature. I don't think they do. It's up to our experience to determine whether they've happened or not.
Okay, probably it would be more, we would be going too much into the detail, because my feeling still is a multiplication of bread violates laws of nature. And probably we can argue why I think in this way, if we are taking it literally, that it literally happened in the way that there was
taking
one
what literally? Sorry, I missed you.
Taking it literally, that there was one piece of bread and suddenly there was 100 or 1,000 pieces of bread. But probably I wouldn't like to develop this slide too far. Actually, there's one concrete question which I would like to ask you. But
wait, it's hard to feed people on non-literal bread.
Of course, this is why I think that probably, parables, when we understand what they are telling us, they are not necessarily mean...
I agree with that entirely, but the point is, if there is no in-principle reason for rejecting supernatural intervention, granted that there is a God, we must be open to the possibility that Christ actually did those things. And if he rose from the dead, that eclipses everything else.
Okay, but question which I would like to ask you, because I know that I have discussed this question with some of my colleagues, religious colleagues, and got different answers to that. You said about this kind of divine interventions, miracles. We know that, for example, Catholic Church can canonize people if they are performing miracles only. And we are knowing that people, our contemporaries, like John Paul II, is on the way to be canonized, or already is canonized, I don't know exactly. But it means that during his lifetime and during our lifetime, some miracles were performed, according to the Catholic Church. Other people, religious people, are claiming that, okay, it was possible during the time of Jesus Christ, it was during the creation, and nowadays miracles simply don't happen. Because, I don't know why, very rarely we experience something of sort of miracles. And another, just to develop this question, why always miracles are in the form kind of very specific actions like multiplications of bread, rising somebody from death, and so on, and never just to show that there was one bottle of, I'm sorry, I'm again simplifying too much. One bottle of water. Now we are discussing. God is willing to show us that He is powerful. Suddenly there is 5 bottles of water. Probably we don't expect anything of this kind of happening. Of course, maybe it's too superficial. We are discussing too simple things, and for God it's not enough reason to appear in this kind of trivial for Him settings. But still. Question is miracles happening still now, in nowadays?
Okay, there are 2 questions there, and they're distinct questions. As a Christian, over my life, looking back at certain experiences I can have, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it, but I would claim to have seen God's direct intervention and guidance. But once you mention that publicly, people say, well, we could explain that psychologically, this and that. That's why I prefer to talk about the instances for which there's the greatest evidence, particularly the resurrection, which is in the stage of history. So that's the first point. The second point is that if you combine my way of looking at it and you're looking at it, I think we can solve your question. What I mean is this: you said you'd rather take it as a story illustrating something rather than literally happening. I take it as both. You see, the description of these supernatural events, the Bible uses the word semeion in Greek, from which we get semiotics. John wrote his gospel as a book of signs. Jesus did these signs. Now take the one you mentioned, water changing into wine. Was it arbitrary? No, because this was a wedding, and wine had run out of a wedding. The Jewish wedding ran for a week. It was very difficult to calculate the wine for a week. I wouldn't like to have to do it. And so it had run out. And what Jesus did was, he took the jars of water that were on the edge. They were religious jars. They'd finished with religion. Now they were enjoying themselves. And he said, fill those with water. And from those religious jars, he produced the best wine. That was a phenomenally powerful symbol. It was a literal act that conveyed the symbol that, what's the reason that joy runs out of marriages? It has to do with purification. They were jars of purification. But Jesus pointed to a source of purification that wasn't chilly cold water. It was the most glorious wine they drunk. So you see that by combining the physical with the symbolic intention, you get Jesus pointing to who he really was, the one who had come to bring joy back into human relationships. I see that as a huge thing. And the others can be dealt with likewise.
Maybe I'll intervene a little bit. Marta, so one of the principles of science is the idea of confirmation. So if someone finds out something via science, it's sometimes not considered completely proved until other people replicate the same thing again and again in other circumstances. Do you think there's a certain contradiction between what Dr. Lennox is saying about miracles and this application of replication and confirmation?
Okay. Very short replica, and then I will answer the question. Actually, once in my life I was really lucky to be similar discussions like we have today with Dalai Lama. Not with such large audience, but it was very few people in discussion, and then it was published as a report of this discussion. And one of the things which I very clearly remember from Dalai Lama was exactly the point in sense, as far at least as far as I understood it, that if there is in Buddhism some contradiction between scripture, and they have a lot of different and very advanced texts, and something which is happening in science, then Dalai Lama suggested that we should take it as a story, as a parable. And it's not should be taken literally. And we know that my colleagues physicists visited Dar es Salaam with some physics experiments, discussed them with Dalai Lama very openly. And I actually like this type of attitude. Of course, now we are more focused on Christianity, but probably we shouldn't be focusing on only one religion still, because as I said, for me it's more comfortable to feel in the environment of Christianity due to historical roots, in the place in which we are, country in which we are, but still I don't think that we should forget all the rest. But now, coming back to this question, of course, science is always based on the experimental proof. And even if you have very elaborated theories like Albert Einstein, you mentioned Albert Einstein, he is famous with way how we invented his theories very often before experiment, just thinking, very deeply thinking about different physical situations, and then creating the theories, and then these theories were proved. But proved in many, many, many experiments. Of course, if we are coming philosophically to this viewpoint, we can make as many experiments as we would like. It's not, it's never will be convincing in mathematical sense that it's true. No, it's always can have 1,001st experiment which will disprove something. But if we have only one experiment, and I think that maybe I will not be presenting example right away, but we can imagine, or I will present example, many situations when it's impossible to repeat experiment. For example, Big Bang. Universe was created in Big Bang. You cannot replicate it in 1,000 times and to look each time what will be happening. And I think maybe it sounds like very artificial example, only once in all the physics, but I can imagine that we can come up with other situations when you cannot repeat experiments many times. And with miracles it's the same. Probably you cannot repeat Jesus' life 1,000 times and see what he will be doing in each of these cases. This is why I'm thinking that if the miracle happened, just text itself for me, it's not evidence that it necessarily happened. But the situations that I cannot repeat it many times is not also the reason why I should prove that it never happened. Because we cannot repeat this type of things, and as I said, it's not only about scripture, not about Bible. I can think that we can imagine many situations in physical world as well when we will not be able to repeat experiment many times. Even more, in our physical theories, sometimes we are coming in much more complicated situations now. We are inventing theories which we never will be able to test. Like string theory, I will not be going into details, probably people here are not physicists, but it's actually a very interesting time in physics because we are starting to invent theories which we will not be able to test never will be able to test because we will not reach this type of energies in universe, this type of energies in nowadays are not reachable in principle, and so on. And we still are willing to discuss this type of theories and have kind of philosophical proofs that they are true. For example, if we are in science of philosophy of science discussing Big Bang, usually we are using arguments, philosophical arguments, that why we think the Big Bang happened. We can have different theories as well. This is simplest one, for example, or most rational one. And this sometimes is enough to think that this is the right answer. And then if we are in these positions that actually religion and science are in very similar positions, neither of them have more convincing arguments about this type of questions. If we are coming to, I don't know, quantum mechanics, how our computers operate and things like that, then it's different type of science.
The distinction is immensely important that you make, because we often grow up with the idea that science equals repeated experimentation. But some of the biggest issues, as you point out in science, are talking about unrepeatable events in the past. And so there's a difference between inductive inference, that is, many experiments lead to this possible hypothesis, and what we call abductive inference, that is, inference to the best explanation of an unrepeatable event. And of course, forensic science does that. I'm lying on the floor with a dagger through my chest. You can't repeat the murder to see who did it. You have to say, now, if X did it, who had accessed the knife, that would be one explanation. And you go through all the possible ones, and you come up with the best explanation of the historical situation. And of course, you're absolutely right, and thank you for making the point, that when it comes to events like the resurrection of Jesus, we can't repeat them by definition. But we can access them at the level of history and experience, because it is a fact that suddenly the Christian church arises out of Judaism that never was a proselytizing religion. The disciples claim that they met the risen Christ. They gave their lives for it. So we can approach it morally, historically. We can deal with the alternative theories, because most historians agree that, ancient historians that is, that there was an empty tomb in Jerusalem that needed explanation. We can't repeat it, but we can get close to it. And I think, therefore, you're absolutely right. We can't repeat the Big Bang, but we can get within, 3 minutes or whatever it is of the start. So I agree very much with this approach, that we must distinguish between these two kinds of science. But then, what you can repeat, of course, and this is the second level, Christ's resurrection is unique, but its implication is that he's living today. Now, if he claims that through trusting him, I can receive forgiveness and a new power in my life, I can test that, and many people have, of course. So you do get the repeated experimentation possible on the basis of the unique event.
Just responding to one thing you said. So you mentioned that the way science sometimes works is inference to the best explanations,
Sure.
seeing the person lying on the floor. But doesn't inference to the best explanation mean that you just attach a probability to a certain event? So speaking of the resurrection, wouldn't that mean that you would have to say there's a certain probability that this thing happened, but there's also probability that it didn't happen? And doesn't that contradict your certainty?
Certainty is a relative thing. I'm glad you asked that. Just as in science, we cannot prove anything in the natural sciences as we can in pure mathematics. We don't have that possible proof. You made that point. In all other areas, we can have plausibility arguments, probabilistic arguments, and so on. We can make inferences, we can give indicators, and the question is, what degree of certainty can we come to? Now, the impression given by your question is that because we can't have absolute certainty, we can't have any certainty. Now, let me put it this way. I cannot prove to you mathematically or scientifically that my wife loves me, but I'd stake my life on it because I've enough evidence of it. I couldn't prove to you scientifically or any other way that the plane that brought me from Helsinki yesterday here would get me here. But I stake my life on it because there's enough evidence. And so in that sense, yes, you can't calculate probabilities in these cases, but you can't have that absolute kind of mathematical logical certainty. You can't have that anywhere in life. But my contention is that you can make decisions, as we all do, on the basis of available evidence. And in this case, because it's such a big issue, I believe the evidence, both historically and experimentally, is sufficient to stake your life on it. That's as far as I would go, but certainly not to this absolute kind of mathematical, rigorous certainty.
Okay, actually, I think that we are coming to kind of philosophical arguments which are lasting forever, like introduced by Karl Popper and other philosophers. What does it mean in science to some theory to be proved? How we can disprove theory, especially in sciences, natural sciences, not mathematics, which is kind of more abstract. And then, as you said, in certain sense, it is based on in what we believe. So we have some evidence, and at some point I'm saying that it's enough for me to accept this as a truth.
Right.
And honestly speaking, for me, arguments which you presented why I should believe in Jesus Christ are not convincing enough. And as I said, maybe it's my inner problem. And I already tried to illustrate why I'm thinking sometimes feeling a little bit inferior. Because my childhood, how I came to a certain age and things like that. Because honestly speaking, I think it would be much simpler for me and more comfortable just to believe in Jesus Christ and kind of got from this some calm, feel peaceful with the world around me. Currently, I don't have this luxury, and this is why, in some sense, I have some inner struggle, and trying, speaking with different people who are religious, to have these arguments and just actually hoping that they will convince me. I'm speaking absolutely openly and honestly, and still haven't reached this point that arguments presented by you today and some of my colleagues who are in audience in different periods of my time, of my life, and people whom I have met in different, again, places all over the world. We discussed and mentioned Charles Towns. Before this discussion openly started, we both know kind of brilliant gentleman in Berkeley who was excellent scientist, inventor of lasers, Nobel laureate, and at the same time laureate of Templeton Prize as well, which was given about discussion between relations between science and religion. Absolutely brilliant gentleman. I always enjoyed his presence when I was in Berkeley. But either him or you or other people did manage to convince me that there's enough argument to believe in Jesus Christ. As I said, I'm not blaming anybody. It's like more my inner problem. But this is how I feel.
Okay, maybe let's move further from this particular discussion. A question to John. So many of the religions practiced around the world center on humans and human experience. And maybe this is a longer question, but there are certain theories that have been put forward during the last few centuries that conflict with that a little bit. So, for example, the Darwinian theory of evolution by natural selection has shown us that humans are closely related to other animals. Physicists and paleontologists have shown us that humans have existed for less than 1% of the age of the universe. Astronomers have shown us that planet Earth is only a very tiny speck within the unbelievably vast universe. Do you think there's a problem with looking at these religions and combining it with all of this scientific evidence?
Well, you have listed a set of what are presumed scientific facts and then interpreted them. I can interpret them in the exact opposite direction, because it's been known for centuries that the universe was large. That isn't a recent discovery. But what is a recent discovery is that the size and the age are necessary to have carbon-based life. So I think the results of contemporary physics go exactly against what you assert. That is, that human life is so special, it needs carbon. Carbon needs a couple of generations of stars. It needs a large universe, etc., etc., etc. Secondly, you mentioned size, but you're measuring it on a linear scale. If you go with a logarithmic scale, then a human at about less than 2 meters high is halfway between the size of an atom and the size of the observable universe. It's how you're measuring it. And size, of course, does not determine value. Give any woman the choice between a lump of coal and a diamond, and she'll choose the diamond, even though the lump of coal is a bigger bit of carbon. So I think the measurements that you've mentioned don't alter my situation whatsoever. Indeed, I would go further. I would say it's one of the things that particularly astrophysics has brought to us, that this universe is so finely tuned, and has to be finely tuned, to have carbon-based life, that this, for many of my atheist colleagues in Oxford, let me illustrate that. I had a debate with a professor of philosophy recently, and he said, I hope you're going to use your best argument against me. So, of course, I wanted to know what that was, and I said, what is my best argument? Well, he said, if I were going to become a theist, the first thing I would rest on is the fine-tuning of the universe. This is a discovery of relatively recent cosmology and physics. So I just don't think the argument works, to be honest.
Okay. I think questions which you are raising and which you are trying to respond actually is one of the fundamental questions which physicists are thinking at least the last 100 years. And one of the gentlemen who was thinking very deeply about that was Paul Dirac from United Kingdom. And he was asking always question, we have all these sets of physical properties, physical constants in this world. And if we would be slightly changing some of them, what will be happening? And it appears that carbon-based life wouldn't be able to exist. Even atoms wouldn't be able to exist. How it happens that we have such fine-tuning set of physical laws and physical constants that we are living here. And we are able to discuss today this type of questions and why there is intelligent forms of life on the Earth and all that type of questions. And of course, from one sense, it's kind of very anthropocentric worldview. Because we are saying, why such special creatures like ourselves, we are sitting here. Maybe if the fundamental constants would be different, maybe there will be intelligent ocean, as I said, on this planet, and this intelligent ocean would be thinking even more intelligent thoughts that we are able to do. Or some different forms of intelligent existence will be somewhere. Why we should think that we are so special, that the reasons that we are existing here is kind of proves that we are very special. Maybe we are not very special. But still, this is a very reasonable question. And then, as I said already, how people and how physicists are trying to respond to that, and how philosophers are trying to respond to that. One of the theories, as I said, is that there is a multiverses. There's many universes, parallel universes to which we don't have any way to connect or to have information from there, with different sets of physics laws, with different sets of constants. And something happening there. And we are just one of from myriads of other possibilities. Maybe in this universe there are different forms of intelligent life. Maybe in many of them there is no intelligent life. Nobody knows. And then suddenly we are sitting here and saying that we are so superior that we should be concentrating on, I don't know, worshipping that we are here and we are so special, and how it happens that we are here. Maybe we are one of the very kind of simple organisms which are not well developed. Probably, you know, there's kind of writer Douglas Adams in United Kingdom who has these funny stories, and some of them are going something like that. That some superior being came to the Earth and discovered there's some tiny, very stupid, small creatures on the Earth, and why should we think about them at all? We are thinking that we are superior. And then we are, if I'm coming to kind of conclusion from that, what kind of conclusion from that we can have? Of course, we would like to have explanation why we are here, why physical laws are they are, and why these carbon-based organisms are on the Earth, why we are intelligent, which by itself is a very important question, because we have so many biological forms of life, and there's no other way, no other species which developed in intelligent ways. There's some biologists who are thinking that this is kind of dead end of evolution, that normally species shouldn't become intelligent. Because if they are becoming intelligent, sooner or later they will destroy the planet on which they are living. Again, but coming to some explanation, as I said, you can have this theory multiverses, which cannot be proved. It's kind of speculations. That maybe it's this way. You can have religious explanations. Some superior being created it in the way people to be able to develop. Probably you can have many other explanations. And for me, as a coming from science, there's no way to distinguish which one is better, except I believe in one of them. And then I'm coming again to the same question. If I'm a religious from childhood, it's very easy for me to accept this explanation. That there is God which created universe, and this is why I'm here, and this is my purpose to be here, and he gave me some moral laws, and then are coming biologists who are saying that moral laws can be explained from science, because if you will be immoral, then you will... if you are moral, you have in Darwin's sense some advantage in developing your species, because then you are acting collectively and things like that, which I personally don't believe that we can reduce everything to the laws of nature, to the laws of physics. But still, as a professor, I'm starting to speak too long. Final conclusion is that probably it's a question of belief. Which way to explain how this universe come to being, which explanation you are accepting.
Okay, well, let me respond to that. You've said a lot of things there, sir. And the multiverse theory, it was Max Tegmark, the physicist at Princeton, who, facing the fine-tuning, said there's either a multiverse or God. That is incorrect philosophically. Because if there is a God, he can create as many universes as he likes. And I think the problem is, you said multiverse, you could believe in that, religion, you could believe in that, and you place them as equal, but they're not equal. Because there is, as you said, no evidence for the multiverse. And I was interested that you quoted The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is essentially science fiction. Yep. And I was taught quantum physics, I was never good at it, I'm afraid, by John Polkinghorne. At Cambridge, and he makes the point that there's more evidence that since we can't access these other universes, the evidence for them is practically zero, and therefore he finds the much more plausible explanation to be the fact that there's one God. I mean, to postulate an unlimited number of universes to explain our present state is the most extreme violation of a fundamental principle, Occam's razor, keep your hypotheses simple, as versus one God. So my point would be here that that the multiverse I don't find very convincing, but I don't find it an argument against God. You see, for instance, Stephen Hawking, one of his co-workers was a man whose name just slips me at the moment, in Canada, a brilliant physicist. He is a Christian and he believes in the multiverse. So it's not mutually exclusive. And therefore, it's in one sense not worth pursuing that. But you see, as to the specialness of human beings, I believe there is an explanation. The biblical claim is that human beings are unique in the universe because they carry the image of God. Now that, to my mind, is highly plausible. The evidence for it is our specialness in terms of our linguistic capacities. I know that the sun is there. It doesn't know I'm here. So in that sense, you as a human being are infinitely more important than the sun. And so I get guidance from this, that again, the God hypothesis, bringing God into it, makes sense. One of my reasons for believing in God and in Christ is two things: the coherence of the story, but also the fact that it corresponds with reality. I'm very skeptical from what I've heard about multiverses, and I've read quite a bit about them, because I don't find them scientifically convincing. That may be a limitation in me, but they do not threaten my theism in any way whatsoever. And when we begin to speculate of what might have been oceans that are conscious, the fact is we live in a world where the oceans are not conscious. We are conscious. We can do abstract mathematics. We can do physics. And going back to what I said in my statement at the beginning, the thing that drove science for Newton and Galileo was that they believed it was part of their worship of God to understand the way the universe worked. That is, their belief in God didn't hold them back from science. It actually drove them to it. And I think the more they discovered, it wasn't that Newton said, I've discovered gravity, I don't need God. No, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, as you know. And he said, isn't this marvelous, the way God did it? I hope this book convinces people to believe in a deity. Because he believed, as I believe, that the mathematical and physical describability of the universe is one of the evidences that there is a God behind it.
Maybe moving further from this particular point, a question to Martis. So one of the things that Professor Lennox and other theists have said in their writings is that God is an uncreated eternal being. So speaking of eternal, probably something that has existed even before the Big Bang. Given what physics knows about time and theory of relativity and other things, do you think it's a statement that makes sense for you?
Well, actually, it's a question which can be reformulated also in the terms of physics. For example, there is law of gravity. Does it mean that it starts to exist only when Big Bang happened? Or law of the physics existed already before that? And it's kind of, again, philosophical question. And kind of question which we can analyze only which one of the possibilities seems more logical for us, which is more simple, as you said, because we are always willing to have a very simple principles, and if we can explain something in more complicated way and in more simple way, usually we'll be taking this more simple way. And I don't feel that I can answer this question from the viewpoint of science. Because, of course, religious people are claiming, and I expect that God is something outside the universe. It's not the part of the universe. It's kind of eternal outside there, and he was, if it's right, probably it's even not right term that he was there before Big Bang, but it's somehow existed in eternity. And then God created laws of physics, laws of nature, and everything started. For me, I either can accept that or say that I don't believe in that, but I cannot prove that it was not right. For me, as I said, again, I think as I am starting a little bit to going on circles, but I think maybe it's good to repeat one more time, that I would personally feel much more comfortable and would be struggling with difficult questions for myself if I would be believing in God in sense you do. I think it actually makes kind of existence more comfortable, more peaceful, more calm, which I don't experience. I don't have luxury to have that. This is why I am always in this type of discussions hoping that somehow people convince me and present arguments which will be starting to believe. Because again, I am not in the position that somebody will prove that. It's never provable. And still, again, from today's discussion, again, maybe I'm moving a little bit closer to one or another position, but still don't have feeling that you convinced me. Because in some of your arguments, when you said that the hypothesis of God, let's call it, is better than multiverses, I can accept that this is your position, but it's not convincing for me.
Well, I'm encouraged to think that you would feel that having a faith in God like mine would be more comfortable. Because the fact that it would be more comfortable is not an evidence that it's wrong. It just might be an evidence that it's right. That's point number one. Point number 2 is, of course I wouldn't expect to convince you. It's not a question of me convincing anybody. What I believe is important to do is to present the evidence in the public space and let people decide for themselves. And I wouldn't remotely expect to be able to give you enough evidence in the space of this, because after all our title was Science and God. It wasn't to discuss in great detail the evidence for Jesus Christ. I'd be prepared to do that. I'm very willing to do it, but certainly wouldn't feel that we'd done enough to get there. So I think this is a kind of ongoing process. My experience has been, debating with people and talking to them and getting to know them as friends, that this kind of process can take many, many years. So conviction in just a few arguments is relatively unlikely, although it can happen. To come to the question, though, it is beyond science, this kind of issue. So how do I start with a question like that? I wouldn't be claiming that I can answer it, but I think there are ways into questions like this. I start with, well, what is claimed about God? The Greeks were very interested in different categories of reality. And one was, looking at the universe, there are things that come to exist. They haven't always existed. And so they asked the question, is there anything that never came to exist? And into that world, the New Testament came, and John the Apostle wrote this: in the beginning was the Word already was. That is an existence statement. It's claiming that God is Word, He's intelligence, He's energy, He's information, and He never came to be. It then says, all things came to be through Him, and without Him nothing came to be that came to be. In other words, mass energy came to be. Now, does that statement make sense? The second part of it certainly makes sense, that mass energy came to be. And we mustn't forget that up until the 1960s, there was a large body of opinion that followed Aristotle and said the universe was eternal. And I can remember in England, when the Arno Penzias evidence of the microwave background established another very powerful reason for believing in a beginning to space-time, our British scientific establishment said, we must resist this. And the editor of Nature at the time was John Maddox, and he wrote something like this. He said, we must not allow ourselves to be convinced by this theory that space-time has a beginning. Why? Because it will give too much leverage to people who believe the Bible. And the irony was that one of the greatest cosmological advances in physics of the 20th century was being resisted by the scientific establishment, because the statement that there was a beginning had been there for thousands of years in the Bible. So what I would say to you on your question is, of course we can't get behind questions like this. I mean, of course, because we don't know what time is. We don't know what energy is. We can use them, measure them, we've all kinds of equations. But I read Richard Feynman, and I find him very instructive, pointing out that the actual realities of these things, so to understand the nature of God, to understand it, is a very different thing from believing that He's like that. Let me give you an illustration of it. All of us sitting here probably believe in consciousness. We don't know what it is. We believe in energy. We don't really know what it is. But we believe in it. That is, we feel that these concepts are describing realities for which there's sufficient evidence to accept them. And so, for me, the fact that Jesus stood in this world and said, before Abraham was, I am, is making a very profound statement of the relationship of God to time, which is obviously very complicated. So I do believe in an uncreated eternal God who caused the universe to be. What I find very interesting, and this is another big part of the contemporary debate, is that astrophysicists believe that we get back to what? And the current theories, particularly put forward by Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, is nothing. The universe comes from nothing. And getting something from nothing is a very difficult matter, as you'll see if you read any of the books that claim to have done it. I would suggest that the Christian explanation at that level, it's not a full explanation, but the claim is that the universe comes from nothing physical, but it doesn't come from nothing. God is not nothing, but he's not physical. God is spirit. And so that at least makes sense. The idea of a universe, as Hawking puts it in his book, The Grand Design, which fascinated me when I read it, because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. But that's nonsense. The universe will create itself. If I say X creates Y, it means if you've got X, you'll get Y. If I say X creates X, it means if you've got X, you'll get X. And that's sheer nonsense, even if an advanced scientist is writing it. And it actually goes back to the question you said, the law of gravity, is that meaningful without a universe for which it can describe? I suspect it isn't. But that's another question. So that's my minimal response to what you have to say.
Okay, I think still we have some kind of problem with that. And
Sure.
I think that I suspect that we have even some contradiction from you started and stated at the beginning. Maybe I misunderstood you, because in the beginning you said that if in the explanation of how this world functions, we have some gaps, it wouldn't be a right way to fill these gaps with saying God did that. In this particular point, of course, we don't have full picture how this universe came to being, what happened in the point zero, from where it all came. Do we need for that hypothesis of God, or still we have room to explore it from the viewpoint of kind of pure physics? I still think that we have still room to use physics to try to find physical reasons in physics to explain that.
Oh, I agree with that, but you yourself said that this is beyond science. So when I say the ultimate reason for the existence of the universe is God, that's not saying that we can't do more physics. It's simply saying that I'm adding up the indicators and saying that within physics, and indeed a point we haven't come to yet, the very fact that we can do physics and describe the universe in mathematical terms is evidence for me, positive evidence, that there's a rational spirit behind it. That's not a God of the gaps. That's following the evidence up to plausible implications. And if, as you said, it goes beyond science, it's not threatening science.
It actually seems like we have reached the point where we should actually give the opportunity to the audience to ask their questions. So thank you very much for this part of the conversation. So what we're going to do now is every one of you has an opportunity to ask a question. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll try to deliver a microphone to you. One thing I do want to say, we've all been to these discussions and we know what usually happens is that someone gives a 3-minute rant about something. So please try to keep your question short, concise and relevant to the point that we're making. What we will do is that both of them will not respond after each question, but at the very end, they will gather all of your questions and respond in a single statement. Okay?
Yeah. I have a question for Professor Lennox. From what you said and from what I've heard in your previous discussions with other people, the term of miracles or supernatural things is very important to you. For example, for the implantation in the evolutionary process in the humans of the image of God or something. However, the question is, what do you mean by the supernatural? For example, if we would try to, of course we can't, but it's a thought experiment at least. If we would try to examine a miracle with all the best possible and maybe not even yet invented scientific methods and put it to scrutiny, what would be the thing that would signify it as a supernatural rather than as an improbable event that we can't describe with laws of nature, but that we can see. And if you, one last thing, and if you say that the supernatural, the definition of supernatural is something that God causes, but the supernatural is the primary thing with which we get to know God, I believe that there is a tautology of a sense. So basically, how else would we be able to speak about the supernatural?
Anyone else?
Jā, jāsaka, es esmu tikpat varbūt skeptisks bijis kā profesors Auziņš un meklēju arī pierādījumus Dievam. Un manuprāt, viņi ir. Es tā mazliet pārsteidzu, kad jūs savā diskusijā nepiegriezāties šai krātuvei dabas likumi. Ir tik ārkārtīgi pārliecinoši. Un, piemēram, Zeme griežās divās plaknēs ar milzīgi precīzu ātrumu. Ja viņi nebūtu noregulēta burtiski uz milimetru simtdaļām, te viss notiktu uz Zemes citādi un jau makro pasaulē. Un dabā viss notiek 4 gada laiki un gravitācija, un viss tas ir noregulēts ar ārkārtīgu precizitāti. Un es gribu teikt, kad iedziļinās šajos dabas likumos, tad viņi ir tik nepārliecinoši, man vismaz tā likās. Un man pat bija tāds piedzīvojums, kad 83. gadā mūs ar Gunāru Astru pratināja Čekā, es pa kluso ienesu tādu grāmatu uz katras lapas, kur bija šie Dievu pierādījumi no dabas. Un viņš bija
Es varētu palūgt jūs noformulēt domu līdz galam. Mums vienkārši vajag vairāk jautājumus paņemt.
Jā, kad viņš to grāmatu paturēja sev un nenodeva mani, un pēc tam viņš atvainojās man jau pēc 10 gadiem un stāstīja, kā viņu arī šī grāmata pārliecinās. Ir tā kā lūk, šie dabas argumenti ir ārkārtīgi spēcīgi.
Paldies.
Yeah, okay. Hey, so let's talk a bit of philosophy. Let's talk Nietzsche. He's famous for his phrase, God is dead and we have killed him. And I'd like to hear your opinions on Nietzsche's worldviews on both religion, the Christianity, and science. And both of these he has great criticism for. So perhaps science and religion are both systems that are sort of contradicting each other on the bigger picture, but on the smaller picture there are two systems that are sort of supporting each other and leaving no space for doubt. Thank you.
First of all, my compliments to you, Mr. John Lennox, about sharing and really not being ashamed of the Christian faith, even being as a scientist. And my actually question is counting this that in the recent times there are more and more scientists really come to the conclusion that that theory of evolution doesn't hold the water. And should we not really take more care about our country in order to get the truth on and to teach this in our schools, in our universities, using the textbooks, just giving the people the option, you know, because now we have only one evolution theory which is not really scientifically proved, which is simply blind faith.
2 more questions, maybe.
Okay, so to put it simple, if we give the benefit of doubt that the God is almighty and it is all just, why does he, throughout the Bible, this evidence you mentioned a lot, kill massive amounts of people, for example, like these 70,000 Israelis, because of the sin of one, in this case, David? So how can there be so much contradictions and still this story be so coherent in your opinion?
2 more.
I have a question to Professor
Okay,
Lennox.
I go. Okay, yes.
Right. So basically, it seems to me that the idea of creation of the universe is kind of a nonsensical question, because creation, only makes sense when there is time. Creator, when creation is possible, when there is a creator and there is time where this creation, act of creation happens. When there is no time, you cannot really talk about creation. And so the talk about and discussion about creation of universe is kind of nonsensical, like trying to find a derivative of the point that doesn't have other points near to them in some mathematical function, if you know what I mean. I mean, this is really non-intuitive, but I think we should understand that nature doesn't always work in intuitive ways.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have also a question. My question is following. If I go into YouTube, I can see many videos where humans act like an idiots. For example, this is called epic files. Next, if I take Bible, in Bible is written that humans are very similar to God and God is very similar to humans. Therefore, his question, is it true that God is a little bit idiot? Thank you.
Thank you guys for your questions. I will also add two of the most interesting questions. Could we have order, please? I will also add two most interesting questions that we have received via Twitter. So actually, the first one is a mirror question to both of you. It's a question to John Lennox. What would you have to see or encounter to stop believing in God? And the question to Maat Sauzinch is, what would you have to see or identify to start believing in the Christian God that John Lennox described? And the second interesting question is, how would you both think belief in God would shake if we would discover intelligent life in other parts of the universe? So maybe we could start with a response statement by Maat Sauzinch.
Okay. Probably I will try to respond to the questions which are more related to science and was addressed in some sense to me. And probably John then will try to reflect on some other questions. First of all, I think some of questions which you already raised, I got feelings that we discussed them in length already during our discussions. First of all, about this fine-tuning of universe, what happened before the time zero, what happened before Big Bang. Can we have a rational explanation for that, or just kind of speculative philosophical or religious theories about that? Of course, I can reiterate again, probably that for me, fine-tuning of universe not necessarily means that we need God to explain that. It's one of the ways, and I respect that it can be used to explain why universe is the way as it is, but I think that we can have other explanations, and for me, there's no clear, not evidence, because you cannot prove that, but clear reason to choose one, to prefer one against another one. John presented some arguments why probably I should turn more to the direction of the creation by some supernatural being, by God. But as I said, for me personally, I didn't have enough convictive power, what you tried to explain, to turn to this one particular story. Then some of questions I think was, I will be very clear and very open. I kind of questions we sometimes naively try to ask, like why God cannot create stone as big as he cannot lift it himself and something like that, which for me are not serious questions. It's kind of tautology or self-referencing questions, and why people are acting stupidly I'm sorry, but it's kind of these type of questions, and probably I will not try to respond to that. I think one of the very serious questions was one which was posted on the web in Twitter, and my part of this question was what kind of situation or evidence should I have to start to believe in Christian God. I don't think that at any point I can have enough proof or evidence. I think something different should happen inside me. It's not like a way that somebody will present me argument and prove, I don't know, mathematically or in terms of physics that this is time to change your position and start to believe in God. I think it's more like some personal experience. I still will use term mystical experience. Probably maybe we understood a little bit different way what we understand by this term, but I expect that something of this kind should happen, and if this would happen, then probably I will change at that point my position and start to believe in a Christian God. I may be in some other God. I cannot exclude this as well. Although I said due to my historical background, most reasonable assumption would be that it will be Christian God. But again, I am not sure that it will be happening at a certain point in my life. As I said, I would be feeling more comfortable if it will happen, but up till this moment, it didn't happen.
Thank you. Professor Lennox?
How long have I got?
Let's say 3 minutes.
Excuse me. These are very interesting questions, and each of them needs a lecture, actually, even to begin to answer it. Q&As are very unsatisfactory because what you're about to see is simply my initial approach to some of these questions. But the research you do is much more important on them afterwards if you meant it as a serious question. One of the questions was, how do you define supernatural? These fundamental concepts are often difficult to define, but the basic idea is that the notion of naturalism is that this universe has no transcendence, there's no creator, there's nothing beyond a closed system of cause and effect. So when you meet someone who's risen from the dead, you would immediately know that something totally out of the ordinary has happened. And if what is involved there is an injection of power from outside the system, then that is what I would mean by supernatural. Now, Nietzsche was mentioned. Nietzsche is very important, of course, and he did express very violent views, very like Christopher Hitchens, against Christianity. The sad thing about Nietzsche is that the objections he made to Christianity were the objections that Jesus made to false religion. You see, often Christianity is accused of violence, and yet when Jesus was arrested, he told his disciples not to use physical weapons. And the interesting thing about the history is that Christ was tried in front of the Roman governor Pilate. The charge was political terrorism. And the fascinating thing from the perspective of ancient history is that Christ was arraigned because of that charge and declared innocent. When he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. Otherwise, my servants would have been fighting. To this end I was born, and to this end I came into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth." And Pilate, the governor, said, "What is truth?" and went out and said, "Jesus is innocent." Because Pilate could see, as any of us can see, that the one thing you cannot do by violence is impose truth, especially if it's truth about peace with God, forgiveness, and so on. So the charge that Nietzsche makes against Christianity, real Christianity, is false. The problem is there have been people who have claimed to be Christian and have disobeyed Jesus Christ and used violence to further their own ideology and their own ideas. Now, that's a huge topic. And a related topic to it is the one you mentioned with the apparent genocide of the Old Testament. Now, this is a serious thing. It's not Christian, it's pre-Christian by definition. And people say, look, God commands Joshua, for example, to destroy whole tribes. Well, you've got to look at that very carefully, because the phrase, destroy them all, is, according to scholars, it's a repeated technical phrase, which means gain a decisive victory. Now, we have a game in England that they call football. And if you've ever been to a football match and sitting behind a couple of big chaps that are saying, kill them, kill them, kill them, you know they don't mean that literally. They mean win, please do win. And Nicholas Wolterstorff, for example, who's investigated this, say actually the book in the Bible that describes the apparent genocide is the very same book in the Bible that gives the first humanitarian laws for military engagement. It's also the book that gives us the moral values with which we criticize the action. And so scholars like him have come to the conclusion that those two things are together because whatever happened did not violate those laws. Now, I can't go further than that. I've actually written a book, if you don't mind a bit of advertising, called Gunning for God, that actually goes into this in detail. Can I come to the question you asked? There are several others here. Oh, the YouTube thing about men in the image of God. Is God an idiot? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest gifts you've been given is to be made in the image of God with the capacity to say yes or no. The capacity to choose, which means that you are capable of love. That is a magnificent gift. God could have created us robots, but then we wouldn't be human. Many people have said, couldn't God have made a world in which people don't behave as they do? Of course he could, but there'd be no people in it. We'd be robots, automata. And, you know, I have got children and grandchildren. When I brought my daughter into the world, I looked at her and I thought, you know, you could grow up to reject me. Why have children then? Because the risk is worth it. And I think this is the answer to your question. It is a tragedy when human beings use that magnificent gift of God to behave like idiots and fools. But to argue from that God is an idiot is, of course, absurd, because it is the gift of the capacity to make our own decision that is the biggest thing you've got. And of course, from my perspective, the biggest thing you can do with it is to put your trust in God. Finally, shall I come to this?
I think that's the most important one. What would you have to see, or what would you have to encounter for you to stop believing in your version of the God?
I'd have to be given powerful evidence that Jesus never rose from the dead, that he never healed the people that he did, that he never brought peace and security into the lives of people. I'd have to be given evidence that Christianity was not at the back of some of our major institutions like hospitals, hospices, the emancipation of slavery, the universities, the legal institutions. I'd have to be given evidence that the transformation I've seen in my own life, having lived with Christ for over 60 years, that was all false and simply Freudian wishful thinking. I'd have to deny the multiple experiences in relationship with my wife and children where God has been real and has guided us. I'd have to reject the conversion of people that I've seen marriages repaired, people saved from drug or narcotic addiction and their lives transformed, meaning come into life. As I speak to you, I'm thinking of speaking in Harvard, and there was a young man sitting right up there, and when I'd finished, he called down to me, he said, "Look at me." And I was so amazed. I looked at him, of course, and he was beaming. He said, "I was listening to you in Princeton, And he said, my life was in a total mess. And he said, that night, I came to trust Christ. And he said, just look at me, I'm completely transformed. All of that would have to be negated.
Okay, we will now finish. You can clap at the very end. This is not the end. So both of these gentlemen will now have an opportunity of up to 3 minutes, and this time really 3 minutes, to give their closing statements which summarize their thoughts about everything that we have discussed. So Mats, you can start first.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank John and all the audience for this marvelous discussion. And it's absolutely true that I am saying that I really enjoy this discussion, not only intellectually, but personally, because I believe that it was not only intellectual discussion, but was discussion about values, about truth, with capital truth, which is not only scientific truth. And if we are coming to the kind of short summary conclusions, what I got from all that discussions, that two things are coming to my mind, and two maybe in some sense historical episodes. I may be wrong, but I believe that it was Pope Paul II who asked Bellarmine, one of his scholars, to discuss with Galileo his ideas and his theories. And sometimes if we are looking history of science nowadays, it's portrayed that Bellarmine was kind of somebody who didn't understood science, and Galileo was the bright gentleman, but actually I believe that it's more complicated from that type, because both of them were very well educated and really scholars. But they stood in absolutely different positions. In sense, what was the main evidence for them? For Galileo, the main evidence, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, was what he was seeing in his telescope, and he was one of gentlemen who invented telescopes and sees the satellites of Jupiter, and from that invented kind of theory how universe functions. And Bellarmine, for him, the main arguments was in scripture, in Bible. And that time it was not so clear to demonstrate which one is more relevant. For both of them, their position was and their arguments were more relevant. I wouldn't like to draw parallels for our discussion, but in some sense, still, in many cases, when you discuss different things, you refer to Bible, to some miracles, to the life of Jesus, and said that this is the main argument of why you are believing in that. And in some sense, it a little bit resembles that this is just different set of evidence which each of us are considering most relevant and most important. And in this sense, maybe this is why in some points we still didn't came to similar opinions, although in many cases I think that the positions was rather close. Another one point which I would like to make, and again it refers to the truth with capital T. I believe that this was probably quotation will not be very precise, but quotation from Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and at some point at least, sometimes actually when we are quoting some of these historical people and saying this was evidence for this or evidence for that, historians are trying to examine and not always finding precisely these arguments in the history of science, but still I think these arguments somehow in general reflects the viewpoint of these people. And one of the statements of Niels Bohr was the opposite to any great truth is another great truth. If we somehow are arguing which truth is more relevant, religion or science, probably if we are coming to this kind of crucial points when we are starting to ask why, then we can be on opposite positions, and both positions, at least this is what I'm getting from this discussion, can have points, can have arguments that this is the way how I am thinking, how you are thinking, and there's no ways to convince that one great truth is better than another way to get truth, at least for me. And this is kind of, again, personal conclusion or feeling which I am getting out from this evening's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. John, your closing statement?
Well, I've enjoyed the discussion immensely, Macias. Thank you so much for being so open with your views and your questions. It's been a privilege, indeed a rare privilege, to meet someone who is so distinguished in science and yet so honest about the limits of science and these personal questions. I have enjoyed the discussion, and I think and I hope that the audience has found it helpful in exploring these things. You make a point about Galileo. The story interests me greatly because, and I think I should mention this, because you may have gained the impression incorrectly that I take the whole Bible literally. I do not. Jesus said, "I am the door." He didn't mean he was one of those. In other words, there is metaphor in the Bible, but it's important to realize that when we use metaphor in the Bible or in science, it stands for a reality. So when he said he was a door, he didn't mean literalistically, but he meant he was a real door. The problem with Galileo and the cardinal was they read the psalm literally. God has fixed the earth on its pillars so that it should not be moved. And they took that literally. Now we don't. We say the Earth is stable in its orbit. It was a metaphor for stability. If they'd done that, there would have been no need for an argument. So it is important to realize where there are metaphors and so on. But my second point, and final point really, is this. You made a very interesting statement, if I got it right, just towards the end, where you said you don't think you could ever get enough evidence to believe, say, what I believe. I think you can, actually. I'm less pessimistic than you. You see, mathematicians are very difficult people, and when it came to getting married, I took a very long time to make up my mind. It took me 7 years, because I wanted everything worked out from the beginning. But what I discovered was this. When it comes to relationship, there comes a point where we've gathered evidence, and then we've got to decide whether we can make a step of commitment. We don't know everything, but we know enough. Now, it's important in all of this discussion that we realize one thing that hasn't been said yet. God is not a theory, he's a person. So that ultimately relationship with God is not relationship with a theory, but with a person. And in order to get to know a person, you have to give up your distance and make a certain commitment. So the point I'm making is this. I believe that you or anybody else here can get to know God. You want evidence, rightly so. And you can't make a step of commitment until you have enough. But you cannot know completely what it's about until you make the step of commitment, just as you cannot know what marriage is until you make a proposal. Now, I didn't know everything about my wife-to-be, but I knew enough to know I could trust her. And therefore I believe that in Scripture, in history, and of course as a scientist, that everything moves together in the same direction, that there's strong plausibility arguments for the existence of God. But now what Christ claims is that if we make the experiment of trusting him for forgiveness and life, that he will meet us and give us that we can test, but it takes a personal step of commitment.
Yeah, sure.
But just half a minute, very, very short response. Just not to be misunderstood. Because when you are saying that you have gathered enough evidence to marry your wife, well, I'm trying to remember how it happened in my life. I was not gathering evidence. I was just in love and I married her. I believe that the same should happen with God. You are in love and you are with God.
That's absolutely
right. You are not gathering
right.
evidence. And this is what I said, just not to be understood, that my feeling is that there will never be enough evidence piece by piece that then there's critical mass to start to believe. Just somehow it happens, you are in love, and it happens.
Well, you put it brilliantly. I think it's possible to fall in love with God.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you, guys. One very, very final thought. So thank you everyone for coming out and listening to this conversation. I hope you found it stimulating. I just wanted very briefly to thank the people who were responsible for organizing this, because this required a lot of moving parts. So thanks a lot to the University of Latvia. Thanks a lot to the Faculty of Physics and Mathematics of University of Latvia. Thanks a lot to the Faculty of Theology of University of Latvia. Thank you IFS Latvia. Thank you CMBC Latvia, and thank you Kota Doma. And thanks to all of you. See you in other discussions and debates. Thanks.